Well, you join me mid-session here on the glorious Brasenose 2, a lake that is renowned for doing big hits of fish. And this session has been no exception, probably my best ever to date in terms of catching big fish, with this being my 12th carp over the 30-pound barrier. In this short video, I'm going to run you through the bait that I've been using, and more importantly, the rod, reel and line setup that I'm using to make spomming easy and light work. When it comes to fishing places like Linear, obviously you'll be using the Spod and the Spom a hell of a lot. There's a lot of carp in these lakes and they respond massively to bait. Now, a lot of people think that spomming all day is hard work, but there's a few things that you can do to make it just that little bit easier. So I'm going to run you through the setup that I use now for all of my spomming, and this is the setup that I feel that I get the most out of, and it makes it the easiest for me to spom with. So first things first, the rod. Designated spom rod. This is a 12-foot LR version. There's 4 different rods in the range. You've got the 10-foot, there's a 12-foot medium range, a 12-foot long range, and there's also a 13-foot rod as well. Now, spomming is a very personal thing. Just because you want to fish at 120 yards, don't necessarily mean that you need to get the 13-foot rod. Me personally, I can't get on with a 13-foot rod. 12-foot is absolutely perfect for me. This rod, very, very light, recovers quick, and it is designed to chuck out a fully loaded spom right up to the large size spom, which is the one that I use. Moving on to the reel, a big pit reel. You're going to be fishing with a braided reel line, and if you've got a reel with a small spool, you're going to get endless amounts of wind knots and you're not going to be able to get the most out of it. So I use a big 12,000 EOS big pit reel. The line comes off it nice and easy, and it just makes casting that much more effortless. Moving on to the line. Now, this is quite an important thing, the line. A lot of people put a real heavy spodding braid on, and then after it gets wet, after a few chucks, it gets quite heavy and it sort of reduces the distance that they can cast. I've got 20-pound spom braid on here. This is 0.18 in diameter, really, really thin line. And obviously you don't want to be using that without a shock leader. So I've got a 50-pound shock leader on there as well. And that is literally just to take the brunt of the spom when you let the cast go. Another important thing is I use 3 rod lengths of shock leader. Now, the reason for this is because even though the rod recovers really quick, I want the rod fully recovered before the leader knot goes through the eyes. This just eliminates crack-offs and it eliminates any form of disaster. So I've got 3 rod lengths of 50-pound designated spom shock leader on there, and that is the setup that I use for all of my spomming. As I've already mentioned, having the balanced setup makes spomming a lot easier, but there's also one other thing that you can do to make it a lot easier as well. Very, very simple, and that is having your buckets at an easy reach height. Now, I see a lot of people spomming, they've got one bucket, it's down on the floor. Every time they're filling up the spom, they're bending down. Now, I'm no gym freak, but I certainly can't be bending down, sometimes up to 100, 150 times a day probably, filling up a spom. So to make everything easier, elevate your bucket off the floor and have it to hand. I'm here for a bit of a session. I've got a few buckets of bait with me, so I've used 3 buckets to bring up the bucket of bait that I'm using to waist height, nice and easy to reach. But if I was just here and I just had the 1 bucket, spom, I've got a bucket stand available that you can just slot a bucket into, and you can elevate it to any height to make spomming easier no matter what the contours of the bank that you're fishing on. So as I said, nice and easy with the bait up high. I'm going to put a few out now. I'm using the big spom today. Another thing as well, what a lot of people do, got a big spom and they fill it right to the brim. Now, when you fill it to the brim, they weigh a lot. If you're fishing at distance, it's actually quite hard to get a fully laden big spom upwards of 100 yards, which is what I'm fishing now. So I like to put a level load in there, probably 4 to 5 ounces of bait, clip it shut. I will shake the excess off into the bucket, wipe my hand on the edge of the bucket just to get any excess juice off, get into a bit of a rhythm, stand nice and square to where you're fishing, and it's a very easy chuck, straight overhead, out onto your spot. I'm fishing to a clip, rod back, and then as it hits the clip, lower the rod forward, the spom lands nose first, every single time the bait is out of the spom. Retrieve it back and repeat the process time and time again and catch a few carp doing so. Right, I'm just going to talk to you now about how I start off my session. Now, certainly here at Linear, there's a lot of carp in here and they're hungry fish, but they also move. So it's a vital part not to put a load of bait in at the start. I always start with the large spom, obviously where I can, because sometimes when it's windy, I'll switch over and I use the midi spom, but 9 times out of 10, I'll use the large one. Always start the spot with about 8 to 10 spoms, whether it be summer or winter. It's enough bait for me to get a bite, but it's also enough bait that I'm not committed to an area. So if the fish start showing somewhere else, you can move. You know, I see a lot of lads turn up here, they absolutely pile a whole bucket of bait in, and then it comes to say 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a swim's become vacant down the other end. Lo and behold, that's where there's quite a lot of fish in front of, but because they put a whole bucket of bait out, they feel like they can't move. So by starting off with 8 to 10 large spoms, and then after each fish, putting 2 to 3 out, and if the weather conditions change and it becomes really windy, these midi spoms fly like an absolute missile. So putting bait out after each fish, regardless of the conditions, I use a midi spom. And one last thing, you'll probably notice here with the large spom, what I've done is I've adapted a spom float. Now here at Linear, you have to use them. If the spom's cracked off, it has to float in and it can be retrieved. They're not trailing, they're not sinking down onto the bottom. And what I've done is I've cut the spom float in half and I've simply put it either side of the spom itself. So when you close the spom, it's not getting in the way, but should anything happen, any form of disaster happen, the spom in the water, the float keeps it buoyant and it bobs in. And it's also a good way to eliminate wobble. So I haven't got any float behind the spom, it's all tucked up nice and neat inside the spom. Well, I haven't had a bite for probably 25 minutes, half an hour. I know it doesn't seem like a long time, but the importance with these types of lakes is just keep a little bit of bait going over their head. Not loads, just enough to draw them back into the area and pull them back down. So I'm going to literally just put 3 half-filled large spoms straight out onto the spot. And just before I chuck it out, you'll notice I've got a finger still on. Now, whenever you're spomming, if you're spomming with braid and you haven't got one of these on, there's only one place that you're going to end up, and that is in hospital having the end of your finger stitched back on. If that braid slips or the bail arm accidentally comes back over, your finger takes the full brunt of it, and that will just cut straight through your finger like a hot knife through butter. So always make sure the clutch is nice and tight, everything's set, nothing's in my way, and a nice easy chuck back out onto the spot. Rod up in the air, on the clip and down. We'll put 3 of those out and hopefully it entices a bite. And whenever you're looking to put a big hit of fish together, the most important thing is finding the right spot. With the spom rod, it doubles up as a leading rod as well. On the end of my leader, I've tied a big loop with a tiny little tag end on the end, which means I can change quickly between my grappling lead and my spom. When you're fishing for a big hit of fish, obviously you're fishing day and night for that hit of fish. So accuracy is massively important. Now, as much as I am trying to find the best feature possible on the bottom, I'm also trying to find the best horizon tree marker. And the reason for that is so over night time, it makes casting a hell of a lot easier. Luckily enough, the peg that I'm in here at Linear has got a real nice horizon tree line, and there's many ups and downs in the trees, and I can pick a nice tree that's visual day and night. So all I do to start with, normally I'll chuck out just with a straight lead first. What I mean by a straight lead is one without the prongs, a non-grappling lead, and that's to chuck out, because if it's weedy straight away, you don't want to be spending hours pulling in loads and loads of weed. You want to search around, look for your spot, and then once you've found a spot that you're happy with, you can take that lead off, put your grappling lead on, and you can see exactly how clean it is, because sometimes with a normal lead you might think it's clean, but you put a grappling lead on and it tells a whole different story. As soon as I found the spot, it's in the line clip, wrapped up around the distance sticks, a mental note of that's made, and then all I do for that session then is I focus solely on the tree that I'm casting at. Not looking around, not looking at anywhere else, because I want all my bait to go down the same tree every time. You know, you're not going to be bang accurate. As much as I've fished and done this style of fishing, you're never 100% accurate. but you want to go down the same tree every time, aim your 3 rods at it every time, and you know that all the way you're fishing out there and the leads and the spoms are hitting the clip, you're fishing as accurately as possible. And then all you're doing, unhitching your lead, putting your spom on, and you're good to go. Whenever you're fishing for a big hit of fish, one of the key elements is A, having enough bait, and B, having the right bait to keep them coming back. I've used the same mix for years. I keep it very, very simple, and I rely on just a few things. First things first, base of the Spod mix, sweet corn. It's bright, it's visual, it's cheap, and the fish can't simply get enough of it. Into that as well, always add a decent quality boilie. Through the winter months, it'll be manila. This time of year, the krill. Some whole, some chopped, and a fair bit of it mulched up as well. In this bucket in particular, as we've just come out of lockdown, I had loads of bait left in the freezer. So I've defrosted a couple of bags of tiger nuts, and mixed in with them is a few peanuts. I've just chucked them in as well. And moving on, I'll show you the rigs quickly while I've got a rod in. Very, very simple. Now when I'm fishing free on a baited spot, I'm not fishing with PVA bags. I am literally fishing with a single hook bait. Now that could be a single 12mm pop-up like what I've got on here. This is just critically balanced so it sinks down on the rig that I've got. Or it could be a double piece of plastic corn, or indeed it could be something like a snowman or a 360 with a pop-up on. Well, I've got a couple of hours left of the session now. I'm going to put a few more spoms out, see if I can entice a bite before I go home. I hope that by watching this video that you can see, having everything to hand, having the setup balanced, having your bait right by your side, that you can see that spomming isn't a chore and it's actually quite enjoyable, and that you can go out on the bank, spom a bit of bait out there and have a result. Well, no sooner as I put a couple of spoms out there, it's away. It's been a bit of a frustrating morning. It's been quite clear, bright sunshine, but the last half hour, a bit of ripples come over, and sure enough, one's ripped off. Well, one thing's for sure, they've been proper having a go. All the fish this session have fought so hard. The average fish, again, been phenomenal for this trip. And it'd be nice to end with another good one. I've got to be honest, it doesn't look like a too bad a fish, to be honest with you. No, in fact I know what fish it is, so I'm going to be quiet. That there is probably the rarest fish in the lake to come out. He's looking semi-beaten now. Go on, I'd love that to go in the net. Oh, what a fish, what a fish. Yes! That is a very nice common. Oh my God, what a way to end the session. If it wasn't good enough already, what a result. What's the biggest carp you've ever filmed? Well, I thought we'd wrap the filming up, but clearly the fish had other ideas, and yeah, there was one more surprise out there waiting for me. Middle of the day, roasting hot, looks absolutely diabolical out there. Trickled a few more spoms out just before going. It was ripped off. Check that out. 37-pound Brasenose 2, the big ghosty common. I am absolutely over the moon. This session has been a dream. I could have never ever imagined it going the way that it's gone. This is my 13th fish over 30 pound in a little over 36 hours fishing. Absolutely incredible. Get out there and get spomming.